All right, welcome to our training on turning dreams into degrees. This is a Train the Trainer on Education Course 2, supporting successful transitions from high school to college. My name is Jessica Petros. I'm our Associate Director of Education at John Byrne Advocates for Youth, and I'm joined by my colleague, Linda Ramos, our Education Project Manager. So before we dive into the actual course curriculum for Education Course 2, we wanted to start off with a little bit of background and context for our trainers today. So Turning Dreams into Degrees is a two-part training. Education Course 1 is for caregivers with youth in 6th through 10th grade, and Education Course 2, which is today's training, is for caregivers for youth in 11th and 12th grade. Now, just as a reminder, this training is a Train the Trainer for individuals who are planning on providing this training to caregivers in California. This is not intended to be a training today specifically for caregivers. Now, anyone interested in providing Education Course 1, we do have the link on the slide where you can find a similar Train the Trainer and all the other materials as well. And before we dive in, just wanted to clarify as well, you'll hear us mention caregivers a lot of the time throughout the trainings, but this training is really designed for any type of caregiver serving foster youth, whether that's a resource family, a foster family agency staff, such as FFA, or an STRTP staff. So feel free as a trainer when you're providing the curriculum to use the terms that make the most sense for your audience. So perhaps you'll want to use the term resource family, perhaps you'll want to use the term caregiver, but you can definitely adapt that as needed for your audience. Now, the training materials as well, they're designed to be delivered either in person or virtually. And as we'll go through the slides, we'll provide a little bit more background information on how you can deliver different content throughout the training, depending on whether you're doing it live, in person, or virtually as well. So the link to everything you need to facilitate Education Course 2 is on the screen, and we've got all kinds of materials to support you as a facilitator. Of course, we have our Train the Trainer that you're listening to right now, found on the website, but there's other materials as well. So there's a trainer's guide as well as PowerPoint slides, and the PowerPoint slides have detailed trainer's notes, and those slides are available in English and Spanish. And so when you go through the PowerPoint, you'll see it's essentially scripted for you as a facilitator with all the information you need to be able to provide the training. And as you go through the training as well, there's a series of different opportunities to facilitate interactive opportunities with your audience. And there's trainer's notes as well to give you some instructions on how you could potentially think about providing those interactive opportunities, whether you're doing it online, on a platform such as Zoom, or whether you're doing it in person. Now, the trainer's guide is really just meant to complement the PowerPoint slides. It doesn't include duplicative information for the most part. What it has in there, it's a general description of the course materials, general facilitation tips, considerations and materials for whether you're doing it in person versus online. And, you know, there's many online platforms that folks can use. Throughout our training, we give tips and guidance if you're using Zoom, which is a very popular one these days. There's also suggested pacing and timing for each section. And depending on whether you're providing this training in LA County or elsewhere in the state, we have a little background for you and suggestions on that as well. And then a lot of detailed descriptions on how to, again, do those engagement opportunities with the audience. And just a little additional background information for each section. It's not meant to be duplicative, but really just give you a little more context for the different course content. And if you're really interested as well in learning more, we have some suggested additional readings you can look at. So in addition to those materials, we do have a little one-pager for some special considerations for facilitating in Spanish. And, you know, today's training is for new facilitators who will be providing the training for the first time. So it's in-depth. We're going to go through the whole course content. But this training has been around for a few years. And so we also have a shorter version, a 1-hour Train the Trainer for our returning facilitators that highlights just the changes that we've made in 2022 since we launched the latest version last year. So, you know, changes in legislation, some updates and enhancements that we made. And lastly, also on the slide is a link to all the caregiver supporting materials. And these are the materials that you would give the caregivers attending your training. So we'll talk about that as well. So this is the link to the caregiver supporting, or the overview of the current caregiver supporting materials. Now, one thing I wanted to note is it's currently November 2022 that we're providing this training, and this is what you'll currently find on the website. There's a series of different handouts and materials, student vignettes, and things of that nature. We're currently in the process of taking a majority of these handouts and actually embedding it within our foster youth educational planning guide. And so most of these materials come January 2023 will be embedded in an expanded and new version of the planning guide. And so just wanted to give you a heads up if you're noticing some differences. That's what we're working towards right now. And this is an overview of what the materials will be for caregivers come January. So we'll have our updated post-secondary educational planning guide for caregivers serving foster youth in California. We'll continue to have our financial aid guide for California foster youth, which has that guide as well as all kinds of helpful financial aid resources to support caregivers and youth. And we'll continue to have our foster youth benefits chart, which gives a little bit of an overview of different eligibility criteria based on a youth's time in care in order to access various benefits. And we'll also continue to have our OIC's Fostering Careers Guide for both youth and supportive adults. I will note, though, that the version for youth does have a few pages with some LA-specific content, but the majority of it is really broad and can be used for any youth throughout the state. And of course, we'll still have our student vignette for anyone interested in doing a vignette opportunity in the training as well. Now, what we have here is an overview of the different content found within the training. Now, I'm not going to read everything on the slide. This information is also in the trainer's guide, but it gives you an approximate amount of the different timing for each section. This includes a 10-minute break. Whether you want to do one 10-minute break or two 5-minute breaks, you can really adjust that based on your audience. There's also about 10 minutes allocated for question and answer. Again, whether you want to allow people to ask questions throughout the training or do it at the end. Now, what I will mention is throughout the training, there's also opportunities we've talked about for activities and things like that. Now, you're not going to be able to do every activity that's provided as an option in the course. So, if you do just go through the course content, this training in its totality is designed to be 3 hours long. And so if you do all the different sections, that'll leave you about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how, succinct you are with covering the content on the slides, to then pick and choose which activities you want to do for your audience. And so we'll show you all the different options as we go through the training today. And then as a facilitator, you'll really want to spend some time before you do the training to decide which activities feel best for your audience. Things you'll want to keep in mind too is know your audience, right? So a lot of trainings now, they're happening virtually. We do have some fun tools you can use to do different kinds of online quizzes or things like that. But, for those of you who might be, for example, facilitating a training for caregivers who might be older adults, they may not be as tech savvy, and some of the technology can be confusing or overwhelming. Or maybe they're looking just at their phone, which is very different than someone who's doing a training to someone who's on their computer or has 2 monitors like I do. So just keep that in mind too about what's going to be the most accessible for your audience. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is a lot of times, a lot of caregivers, they're going to take either Ed Course 1 or Ed Course 2. Ideally, maybe they'll eventually take both courses, but they might just take one or the other. And I mention that because there is some duplicative content in both courses in the beginning. So both courses, have a general overview about the benefits of college, and provide some context on the different college pathways and helping a youth with college and career exploration, because that can really happen at any grade. I'm mentioning this particularly for those of you at our foster family agencies or STRTPs that will be providing both trainings to your staff. Feel free to adapt the courses so that you can take out that duplicative content, and the attendees don't have to listen to that same intro section twice. And the trainer's guide does have guidance for those of you that are providing both courses to your staff on how you can flag which slides are the same and only provide that content once for your caregivers. The other thing I wanted to note is we now have facilitators doing this training, not just in LA County, but throughout California, which is great. There are 2 slides in the training, one that mentions the independent living program and one that mentions the foster youth services coordinating program found within our county office of ed. Now on the slides, these programs are described in very broad general terms, but we do recommend that facilitators update these slides with the contact information for your local programs. Also, there's some variance in some of these programs. They might all do things a little bit differently. So this is also your opportunity. Look at the notes and just make sure that the descriptions of the programs is really reflective of your county as well. And lastly, I know many of you are facilitating this training in LA County. So we also have a supplemental handout called LA County College Planning Resources. And this includes an overview of a lot of local resources in LA County that facilitators can provide as well. And for those of you, that are in other counties, you might want to consider doing something similar, just kind of a little 1-pager or 2-pager with the contact information for your local programs. Maybe you have some local community-based organizations and programs unique to your community that you might want to add to the handout as well. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that in addition to this training, we've also worked with our partners at Foster Parent College to convert this training to their platform. And if you're not familiar, Foster Parent College is an online training platform for caregivers. It's actually nationwide, but it's free for our caregivers here in California. And we've already converted Education Course 1 to their platform. It's called, a little bit of a different name, but it's called Preparing Teens for Postsecondary Education. And it's been on their website for about the past year in English, but we did want to let folks know that they are in the process of adding Spanish subtitles, or I think they're going to be dubbing it as well. And that's expected to go live first quarter of 2023. We're also in the process of converting Education Course 2 to their website, which will be called Preparing Teens for Postsecondary Education Part 2, and that should be ready to go by the end of 2022. So you can look out for that, and it will be available in English, and then eventually down the road we'll get that in Spanish as well. And the content for that course for Education Part 2, we'll also have it available on our JBay website if anyone wants to be able to view or access any of those materials. So with that, that is sort of our general background unique to all of you as trainers of the course, but now we're about to transition into the actual slides for the course content. So as we go through them, we'll be mostly reading the slides as you would, as if you were facilitating the content. But when we get to the opportunities that are more the interactive activities, we will pause just to give you a little bit of context on how you might consider facilitating it. We won't be actually doing a live demo, but all the instructions are in, again, the trainer's notes and the trainer's guide. All right, so let's dive in. Just to start off as an acknowledgement, this presentation was created by John Burnt Advocates for Youth with support from Unite LA, Foster and Kinship Care Education Programs of LA County Department of Children and Family Services, Foster Parent College, and the LA Opportunity Youth Collaborative. So we thank all of our partners. And here we have an overview of today's learning objectives. So, life after high school, it's a really big transition. And this training is really designed to make sure you know how to support your youth in making a smooth transition from high school to college. And, for a lot of our youth and even caregivers, that process can feel really intimidating or confusing. So we believe, though, that caregivers can play a really critical role in supporting youth through this process. And after today's training, you should be able to feel more confident and comfortable to assist youth in this journey into higher education. So after today's course, you should be able to explain the benefits of post-secondary education, identify resources to help students explore their career interests and higher education options, describe the key educational planning milestones between 11th and 12th grade, explain key steps and resources for applying for college and financial aid, and describe specific resources and benefits and supports that are available to really help foster youth achieve their post-secondary educational goals. And just to note too, this course, it's really designed for all caregivers, regardless of your own education level and experience with college. So this course is really for everyone. Now, throughout the training, we're going to refer to a lot of different resources, and they can all be found within this link that you see on the screen. And for our facilitators, I'll just note this would be an opportunity to put this link into the chat or to print some of the materials in advance as well for those of you providing this training in person. Now, before we begin, let's define the term post-secondary education. So what that means, often even referred to as higher education, it's really any formal education that happens after high school. So this can include apprenticeships, trade school, career and technical education, as well as community college, or what's maybe more traditionally known as the four-year college or university. So as we go through the training today, we're going to talk about all the different types of post-secondary education in more detail. But just so you all know, we'll often use the terms post-secondary education or higher education or even college interchangeably, but we want to make sure that you all know that we're really referring to all the various educational pathways that can come after high school. All right, so let's start off by talking about why college and why it's so important for our youth. So simply put, the investment you make to pursue a college degree pays off in terms of future earnings. So as you can see on the slide, the more education someone has, the more they make annually in their salary. Someone with a high school diploma earns about $40,000 a year compared to someone with a four-year degree, also known as a bachelor's degree, who makes about $65,000 a year. Now, this can really add up over someone's lifetime, adding up to over $1 million more dollars. But there's other benefits to having a higher education in addition to the money. Not only do our college graduates make more, they also have greater job stability and lower rates of unemployment. And they say now that over 65% of all jobs require some form of post-secondary education. So what that means is there's less and less jobs that don't require a college degree, and those are actually even more competitive and have less job security. So, if you get a college degree, you make more money and you have more options along the way. But there's other benefits too, such as improved health outcomes, increased rates of volunteering, voting, lower rates of incarceration, greater likelihood of one's own children attending college. And the one that's most important to me is increased job satisfaction. So it's not about just getting foster youth a job, but we want to help them eventually move into meaningful careers so they can really become self-actualized adults, and really thinking about higher education as a key part of achieving well-being. So we know the benefits. So how do our youth feel about college, and how many of them are actually going? Well, when we look at the data, And for our facilitators and trainers, this could be an opportunity to kind of poll your audience, to have them raise their hands, respond in the chat, get a sense of casting their vote of what they think the numbers could be. But what the numbers show us is when you look at how many want to go to college, a lot do. Over 90% say, yeah, I'd want to go to college. So that's great. We know that a lot of youth aspire to go to college, but that's very different than actually completing a college degree. So what percentage of foster youth do you think actually enroll in college? The numbers show, unfortunately, that only about 52% of youth, and this is from 2018-19, so pre-pandemic, the numbers have actually gotten worse, enroll in college within a year after high school. So while a lot of youth want to go to college, the truth is they face a lot of obstacles before they even actually can enroll that can get in the way, and by no fault of their own. And so, today's training is going to give you a lot of key information about how to better support youth with applying and enrolling in college. And then lastly, how many actually earn a 2-year, 4-year degree? The answer is, unfortunately, only about 10%. And this, while this number is low, it's actually been increasing in recent years. So even once at a college campus, a lot of foster youth experience a lot of barriers, again, to no fault of their own, from lacking support from a stable adult, lack of knowledge about college or study skills, unstable housing. And again, in this training, we're going to talk to you about how to get youth proactively connected to supports to prevent some of these potential challenges that can happen along the way. The good news is, though, despite the challenges that foster youth may face, attending college is possible, and youth are doing it. And so today's training, again, is going to give you all the skills and resources you need to be able to help youth overcome these challenges and actually, reach those educational dreams that they're working towards. Now, when we think about how do we do that, we're going to give you a lot of information today, but the single most important factor influencing a positive outcome for children and youth is a lasting relationship with a caring, engaged adult. And there's all kind of research that supports this. And for a lot of foster youth, they've never had that person. But you can be that person that inspires them to see themselves in college, can support them through this process, and successfully get them there. And if not you, then let's at least help you to get them connected to someone else that can be their educational champion along the way. Now, here's a reflection opportunity. Again, this is one of those optional activities you could do as a trainer, where you can check in with your attendees and see, okay, how many of you are talking to youth in your care about college? Is it daily, every week, every month, once a year? Never. And the point of this reflection opportunity is to plant the seed that it's important to engage our youth in these conversations about college, about their careers, early and often. Now, ideally, these conversations start young, at minimum, starting in middle school, and should continue throughout high school. But the other key message we want to send is that it's never too late to start these conversations, and to start as soon as possible and have it be an ongoing process, because the youth's interests and their plans, they can change along the way. So if you're doing this training, on Zoom, you can always launch a Zoom poll. You can use just the chat function. If it's a small group, you can have someone come off of mute. You can also use a tool called Menti, which is really designed more for larger group settings. That's a tool, and we have information in the trainer's guide about it, but it allows you to gather feedback from the audience, and you can do polls on there, word clouds, quizzes even, and we'll show you how to do that as well. But of course, in person, you can just have people raise their hand just to get a sense of where folks are in terms of how often it's on their mind to check in with their youth about higher education. And I would just note too that as you're doing these reflection opportunities, just to set the stage by making sure that this is a judgment-free space, everyone's in different places. It's okay if they're not talking about youth or talking to youth about college yet, because, you know, with a lot of these opportunities, they're not necessarily going to be anonymous. And so you just want to make sure that people feel safe and supported to be honest, to talk about where they're at in this journey.
So this next section will be covering a college path for everyone. And the main point of this section is really to understand the various pathways that are available for students and really being able to empower students to select which pathway is right for them. So looking at the next slide, you'll see a graphic that kind of displays this information. Directly across from the high school is one pathway that students can take, which is to go directly to university. This can include the four-year university system like the UC system, the California State University system, or an accredited out-of-state college or university such as Brown, New York University, or something like USC here in California. Also, you'll find that students can opt to a community college pathway. The community college pathway can serve students who receive a high school diploma or equivalent. It can provide a number of post-secondary career options, either through, we'll be going over certificates and other other degrees that can be earned at the community college level. And it also provides a transfer opportunity to universities, including 39 historically Black colleges and universities. Finally, we have other career technical programs that are available to students. These can include adult education career programs, apprenticeship programs, and residential career programs. These can all lead to various different careers in areas like culinary arts, cosmetology, technology, construction, but whichever pathway a student chooses, it basically provides many opportunities for long-term improved outcomes for not only employment, but also economic stability. And it's important for students to realize that many of these post-secondary options are not the same as high school. There's a lot more choice and decision-making involved when it comes to not only their class schedules, but also just the options available for them. So let's learn a little bit more about what the differences are across these different pathways. If we move to the next slide, we'll look at and compare these different institutions. So in this instance, the slides are animated so that you can reveal this information at different paces. You can do so and maybe asking folks to identify the differences between UC CSUs and private universities. So if you note, most of the requirements between the first three types of institutions, the UC CSUs, private universities, and out-of-state universities are very similar. You'll find for UCs and CSUs, SATs and ACTs are no longer required. However, students still need to complete the A through G requirements. There is still an academic GPA element to be considered in terms of eligibility, and a personal statement is required for the UCs only. When you compare that to private universities, you'll see many of the same requirements, though in this case, you will also see many that request letters of recommendation for admissions to private universities. We do encourage students to confirm whether or not that private university is requiring an SAT or ACT. So you do see the language that says may require. And similarly with out-of-state universities, the same requirements apply, A through G requirements, which are again 15 core courses that consist of a number of topics related to English, social studies, math, science, government, economics, and others. The academic GPA remains consistent. And again, personal statements may be required. Students should make sure they check on the status of that. SAT, ACT may be required, and again, letters of recommendation. So a lot of similarity within the first three types of institutions. When you look at the last institution for California community colleges, though, you'll note this is a different type of institution. It's referred to as an open access institution, where high school diploma is not required. However, we do strongly encourage students to access their high school diploma for purposes of financial aid, which we'll discuss later. There is no minimum GPA requirement for entering into a community college, no personal statement required, and no ACT or SAT required, which again is one of the reasons why community colleges are considered more accessible institutions for students who may not otherwise be eligible for one of the different pathways or colleges. Now, again, looking for room and board comparisons. So many of these types of institutions will provide room and board. Again, you can reveal all the different information of the cells at the same time or take it cell by cell. So if we reveal the first and second, we can ask folks to identify what's the difference between UC CSUs and private institutions or out-of-state universities when it comes to room and board. While all appear to be similar, you'll note the term priority that's listed in the first column for UCs and CSUs. So this primarily means that foster youth are eligible for priority housing, which puts them kind of at the top of the list, so to speak, when it comes to being able to access the housing opportunities available at the UCs and CSUs. However, students do still need to make sure they submit their applications for housing on time. When it comes to the California community college system, you'll find that most campus housing and meal plans are not available through the community college system. Across any of these institutions, students who are not residing on campus or who, again, do not have access to a meal plan are encouraged to look into their eligibility for CalFresh. They can do so by contacting their foster youth support program or speaking to the basic needs centers that are now located across many of these institutions. And looking at the last point of comparison, we'll look at degrees offered. When we're looking at degrees offered, again, the first three institutions are very similar in points of degrees. These degrees may vary, however. For example, with the UCs and CSUs, criminal justice, a very popular major, is only available at the CSUs and not at the UCs. So students do have to make sure they're doing their due diligence and research in making sure that the major they are interested in is available and offered at the institution that they are looking at. Whereas comparison for community colleges offer certificates, again, with career education, as well as Associates of Arts in Applied Sciences and Associates for Transfer. As mentioned earlier, the community colleges serve as a transfer pathway for many different types of institutions, including private institutions, CSUs, UCs, and out of state. So when we're looking at one unique factor about community colleges, though, there are 17 community colleges who have been approved by the state to offer bachelor degrees in unique areas of study that are not available within the CSU or UC system. Now, you can find a full list of these bachelor degree programs through the link in the notes. Some of these include, for example, mortuary science, occupational studies, respiratory care, dental hygiene, and others. So if students are interested in any of those particular programs, they may be able to explore the bachelor's degree programs available at the community college level. Let's take a little bit more of a look, though, at out-of-state colleges and universities. As we mentioned, these universities are great opportunities for students. They do vary widely. So we want to make sure we understand a little bit more about them. Now, tuition is the cost of courses or instruction to attend college or university. And in many cases, for out-of-state colleges and universities, tuition can be more expensive. Now, especially compared to a CSU or a UC. So for example, Full-time students who are California residents at a UC may pay $14,218 or $5,742 at a CSU. That's compared to an average of $26,809 per year for an out-of-state student at a public state school. Now, despite these costs, some financial aid may be available, so interested students should still apply. And in addition, there may be opportunities for interstate regional agreements, like the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program. So this particular program, the WUE, provides significant non-resident tuition savings for Western students across 160 participating colleges and universities. And in this instance, a student for California, for example, could attend one of these participating colleges and pay no more than 150% of that school's resident tuition rate, which could be a significant deduction with a normal out-of-state resident tuition fees. So in this instance, going out of state might provide a great opportunity, again, a new environment for students, a new adventure, but we also want to recognize that it could pose a culture shock and there may be more of a limited safety net. So it is very important for youth to work with their caregivers and other supportive adults to do the research and find out what really will work best for them. So to learn more, though, about foster youth programs that are available at out-of-state colleges and institutions, you can also encourage folks to look at Fostering Academic Achievement Network, which identifies foster youth support programs that are available nationally. Now, let's take a closer look at career technical education programs by going to the next slide. And career technical education, or career education, as it might be better known or referred to. Now, these CTE include fields such as engineering, industrial technology, culinary arts, and a number of others. So these jobs that are available to students majoring in these fields are incredibly dynamic and interesting, and they pay well. So as you see on the slide, earning a plumbing technology certificate from LA Trade Tech can yield a student an income of about $60,000 a year, which is actually more than maybe some students earn after they graduate with a bachelor's degree. Many people don't know that community colleges also offer 200 career educational programs. And these programs may vary by campus. So again, not all programs are offered at the same campuses. So it's important to remember that students need to do their research, find out if their local program that they're interested in is hosted by their local campus. And they may also be interested in knowing that foster youth often qualify for a waiver for tuition that allows them to go to a community college for free. So these CTE programs can also be appealing because they tend to be shorter programs, maybe only 12 to 18 months in length. And so they can definitely provide, again, strong incomes for going to school for a shorter amount of time. They can definitely provide high quality, targeted, career-focused training, especially for those students who don't want more, let's say, of the same high school experience. These programs can provide hands-on learning opportunities that students can really utilize quickly and graduate quickly. Now, federal and state financial aid are available for career technical education programs, and these can include things like the Pell Grant, the Cal Grant, the Chafee Grant. We'll be discussing these in the future. And these can help students not only pay for books, for transportation, for the cost of living, essentially rent and utilities, those costs that are associated with being able to successfully go to school and complete these programs. So while we want to make sure students are aware of these programs as well, program that includes Job Corps, which is an adult education and residential program. Now, that program in particular is a little different than the community colleges in that it provides students who may still need to complete a high school diploma or equivalency with the opportunity to complete their coursework. It can also provide residential housing and support while they're working towards completing their training program. So in this instance, Job Corps is a great opportunity to learn career skills ranging from construction to water management to office administration. And some students may also be interested in looking at other options, like, for example, the military, which has access to housing resources and basic living allowance along with educational benefits. So there are a number of options that are available to students. Again, we encourage them to look at each one and identify what is of greatest interest to them and explore more thoroughly by maybe visiting the different sites, including California community colleges, California adult education programs, as well as Job Corps. Finally, we have an option that includes apprenticeship programs. So if we look at the next slide, we'll note that apprenticeship programs present yet another pathway for post-secondary education. Now, California provides apprenticeship programs that prepare students to enter skilled positions across various sectors, including masonry, carpentry, solar installation, construction, and many others. And in fact, 91% of the students who complete an apprenticeship program retain their employment after their apprenticeship ends. So many students may wonder how they can access these programs. Educational requirements will vary. Some programs prefer that applicants with a high school diploma or equivalent, while others may have more rigorous standards. Some programs require that students complete an aptitude test, while others may require English proficiency. But more information about these different programs is available on the California website that's available on the slide. Ultimately, we also want students to be aware of the for-profit private vocational schools. Now, we also caution about these schools, given that many of these are under scrutiny for poor employment and outcomes of their graduates. Technical programs oftentimes have a result in higher debt for students and lower employment rates for students who complete the programs. So we really want to make sure students do their due diligence in comparing the pros and cons of vocational programs and use extreme caution before enrolling to ensure that the school is accredited and, again, will best serve their needs. Degrees from non-accredited colleges in many cases may not be well respected by some employers. And so again, it's making sure that students are aware of what the industry requirements are for the careers that they want to enter. And with that, we also want to emphasize that community colleges do offer a wide range of vocational programs, many of them similar to what are offered at the for-profit sector, but again, are available with lower tuition rates, oftentimes, again, with tuition being waived for current and former foster youth. So one tip that we want to mainly encourage is for students to make sure that they are enrolling immediately after they graduate high school. Students who enroll immediately after graduation or after completing high school are 40% more likely to persist in college than those who take a year or more off. So this is based off of a study on California community colleges. No matter what pathway a student chooses, we definitely want them to explore this opportunity as they transition out of high school. And we also want to empower students to make that choice, given that no one pathway is better than the other, but all lead, again, to a more successful outcomes and long-term employability and financial stability for our foster youth. So now let's move on and look at resources on college and career exploration. Now that you're a little bit more familiar with the college pathways, let's look at how caregivers can help youth determine which pathway is best for them. And of course, this will depend on the student's educational goals, their career interests, their learning styles, and other preferences. But again, we want to keep in mind that no one pathway necessarily is going to be linear. There will be a number of conversations around the topic. And so it's best to get started early and frequently. Now let's take a look at different strategies that youth can take or the caregivers can take to engage our youth as we look at PACE on the next slide. With PACE, PACE stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Now, this is a type of communicating and behaving that aims to make the child or the youth feel safe. With playfulness is a willingness to kind of laugh and joke and play, even if in difficult situations. And it's not necessarily about being funny all the time or making jokes, but it is about helping children be more open to and experience what is positive in their life, one step at a time. For unconditional acceptance, this is about building a context of safety and connection. So not necessarily having to accept or agree or supporting the youth's belief, not agreeing or supporting the youth's belief or behaviors, but it is about recognizing really what is present with the youth, actively communicating what you accept, that you accept the wishes, the thoughts and perceptions of that youth, and really what's underneath all of the behavior. For curiosity, we want to make sure that this is a big part of this engagement. It's about wondering about the meaning behind the behavior of the child, asking what happened, or maybe what do you think is going on, engaging in those conversations with youth. What do you think about this situation? Or I wonder what that feels like or what that looks like. You basically want to have these open-ended opportunities and conversations with youth and invite them into the conversation. And with empathy, really looking again at helping a youth, making them know that there's an opportunity to be understood, right? To share their thoughts and feelings and to really connect with another individual in a safe and understanding environment. So in this instance with empathy, when the child is sad or in distress, it's the adult showing them that they feel that with them, that they're not alone in this experience and that they have the proper support. When we apply these strategies, it will definitely make it a little bit easier to create a trusting environment so youth can be free to explore, again, in safe and comfortable environment. So with that, let's find out what are some ways to engage youth in career exploration. Now, again, Jessica referenced earlier the Opportunity Youth Collaborative Guide and Companion Guide for Adults that provide a number of tools, the career activities that are available on the slide, and we'll be looking at one of them shortly. But more importantly, how do you have these conversations with youth? And so really asking, again, open-ended questions that are curious, that lead to empathy and openness, looking at what interests the youth has, what they think about themselves, what strengths they may have. So you'll see a sample of questions on the slide and exploring their strengths, talents, and again, career interests. Now, to explore these further, we can look at an opportunity to enter into one of those tools, which is a California Career Zone. So we'll be taking an opportunity with the California Career Zone to explore the tools that are available here. And that will include, for example, an interest profiler. Now with the interest profiler, as you create an account, you'll have an option to look at a 30 question or 60 question interest profiler. This is just one of the many activities that are available to students and caregivers to participate in together as they explore their interests. Students will be allowed to identify different skills and determine which ones that make them are most happiest, or which one excites them, which one they're interested in participating in. And with that, as they complete these different types of likelihood scores, or as you can see the spectrum of responses, they can decide, and this will help them identify what careers or interests they may be most aligned with. So in this interest, I might end up looking at a number of different questions. You can see the types of questions if you want to start your own business, if you're interested in construction or maybe in creative processes, if you're interested in helping professions or with technology. So there's a lot of different types of questions that are here that might be able to, again, help students understand more of how their interests leads to a career. And as you'll see, when they complete the interest profiler, they'll be given a number of opportunities to see, oh, you have a particular interest in social, artistic, and investigative careers. So let's see what types of occupations that might look like. And this will definitely expose students to a broader set of opportunities that they may be familiar with, given many students may be most familiar with professions like teachers, police officers, firemen, social workers. But this again might have other types of careers and opportunities that they may not be familiar with. So if we go back to the presentation, we can continue to look at other types of resources that can help students identify their interests, as well as explore the different salaries, the different professions, and the different requirements to enter into these areas. So again, exploring different careers, if you look at the California Career Zone, again, it allows folks to look at what careers are available, what interest, and what the requirements may be for entering into those particular careers. Other ones like the living wage calculator can help students really identify what types of costs of living in that community and what type of earnings they might need to have in order to be able to afford, right, the lifestyle that they want. The last one, Salary Surfer, helps students see how much a student can earn based off of different degrees. And that is something that, of course, can be very helpful for students who are interested in exploring different careers. With the next slide, we're looking at, again, how other strategies that can help navigate these conversations with students. One particular strategy is using storytelling and using personal anecdotes about maybe your own career experience, what it was like if you had a job as a youth. Was your first job, let's say, at a pizza place or at McDonald's or someplace else? And exploring, again, what that experience was like, maybe mistakes that you made that can help the youth navigate their own life learning. Sticking to facts is another one that might be helpful. Again, this helps to provide information about, let's say, the cost of living or higher education. These are facts that can help youth come up with their own decisions and inform their own decisions versus maybe what you think a student should consider important. It helps them understand what they want to gather from this information and make their own conclusions. Finally, questions versus advice. In this instance, a student may be interested in exploring and giving them advice. What if you gave them and said, again, questions? Ask these questions about what they want to do and help them decide the right decisions. Refer back to the pace, the playfulness, curiosity, again, empathy, some of these strategies that may be able to help youth in this process. So if we're looking also at another strategy that can be helpful for students is goal setting. Now, goal setting can include both short-term and long-term goals. It does not have to mean where they see themselves in 10 years. It could be a short-term goal that includes, for example, improving a grade in a class or practicing soccer so they can make the school team. It's natural and normal to expect bumps and challenges along the way. So really finding out what helps to motivate youth and help them keep moving forward with their goals is an important part of this conversation. You might be able to ask, what are things that I can do to help you stay motivated? And what can we do if we experience bumps along the way? Lastly, you want to make sure to help students identify support at each stage in this process. Sometimes when youth are in survival mode, they may have a hard time remembering to ask for help. So a youth who may have been traumatized or may often be in survival mode, which may mean they're focused on safety and maybe responding in more of a defensive position or from a defensive tone. So when a survival mode takes over, it definitely changes, it creates changes in the brain. And students and youth may have a more difficult time talking about things or planning for their educational future. So definitely trying taking advantage of a support network, whether it's your social worker, probation officer, and other supportive adults. There is the TILP process, the Transition to Independent Living Plan, which is a great opportunity for youth who are in care at 16 or older to be able to schedule these meetings and review goals and work as a team to support the youth in completing their plan and their goals. Now we'll be moving on to education planning milestones. These education planning milestones help foster youth chart a course to their college pathway. And so this is going to be important to find out which pathway, again, might be best for the student and how to plan accordingly for that pathway. Depending on the path the youth chooses, there may be particular requirements that the student has to complete along the way. So we want to make sure folks are aware of what that looks like. One of the tools that's available on the next slide to help support caregivers and supportive adults in guiding youth is the Foster Youth Postsecondary Education Planning Guide. So using this guide, it provides a step-by-step information on how to prepare and apply for college. The guide also includes an overview of the resources available for foster youth found at both the California community colleges, the CSUs, NUCs. And in today's training, we'll review just the key educational planning milestones for 11th and 12th grade, but please note that the guide does include steps for 6th to 10th grade as well. And it can be found in the link above as located on the JBay Resources website. So one quick helpful tool before delving into the steps for preparing youth for post-secondary education, we want to keep in mind that for many children or youth who have been in care, their developmental and emotional age isn't necessarily the same as their chronological age or grade level, and that some steps may need to be adjusted. Caregivers will basically need to meet youth where they are, and some youth may need more guided support and to meet their goals than, let's say, others, and they may need a little bit more time to get there. So with that in context, let's go ahead and look at our educational planning milestones for grade 11. We'll start with looking at the first of three areas, that's the academic area. So with academics, we want to make sure that a student should continue to meet with their academic counselor every semester, not only to make sure that they're on track to graduate, but also to make sure that they are in the right courses, depending again on their college and career interests. Again, some counselors and teachers who are not aware of the impact of trauma on youth may not realize that what a student's full potential could be. So it is important for the caregivers to support and continue to advocate for their youth in these settings. So as much as possible, if a caregiver is able to attend meetings with the counselor, that would be strongly encouraged. In the instances where maybe language is a barrier or there may be other barriers to those joint meetings, working collaboratively as a team may be helpful with your social worker, probation officer, or again, other IOP coordinators or other staff that may be available to assist. An additional benefit of the meetings with the counselors is that they demonstrate that to both the youth and the counselor that the caregiver is invested and involved with the youth's education and with keeping them on track. Now, additionally, students should be encouraged to enroll in A through G courses. These are CSUs and UC required courses for entrance, as mentioned earlier. And there are specific requirements for each subject, such as English, history, and science. So these are all included in the Foster Youth Postsecondary Education Planning Guide, and you can learn more about the requirements there. It's not just about making sure that students are enrolled in high school, but that they are enrolled in the right courses. Now, maintaining regular attendance and making sure that the student is accessing the support services they need will be incredibly helpful to make sure students are learning all the material that they need to learn and getting the proper support, not only from teachers, but maybe also through tutoring services. The next category is looking at building college knowledge and readiness. This could involve looking at dual enrollment courses, which are courses that count for both high school and college credit. Now, these courses are often offered at a local community college and or on their high school campus, and they can provide opportunity for students to earn both, again, high school and college credit at the same time. Now, in fact, dual enrollment courses are actually proven to help increase high school graduation and college enrollment and completion rates. So we want to make sure to encourage, again, information and advocacy around dual enrollment opportunities that may be offered at the youth high school. Now, college tours, visiting campuses, as well as looking at what both virtual and in person. These are great opportunities to explore different college campuses, both local and some that may be further away. The tours can also help connect students to foster youth support programs at those campuses and bridge more information. Now, students who have expressed interest in going into a four-year university should consider taking the SAT or ACT. Again, we emphasize that these courses, these tests, exams are no longer required for college admissions to the UCs or CSUs, though they can still be a very helpful tool when looking at placement for entrance courses like math and English. And lastly, academic enrichment programs. Students should be able to explore and see what's available at their high school campus and within their community. These can provide many productive experiences that extend beyond the traditional school curriculum and really help students develop strong leadership skills, communication skills, and maybe other pre-professional skills. There are even some programs specific to foster youth, and the list of those foster youth specific academic enrichment programs are found in the Post-Secondary Education Planning Guide. There's also a range of activities that youth in care can do to develop workforce readiness skills. And so we really want to look at that last category of elective extracurricular or career exploration and readiness. And so these can include, for example, exploring those career assessments through the sites that were provided earlier, as well as signing up for other extracurricular volunteer opportunities, including summer job and paid internships. Caregivers can assist their youth in searching ahead of time to ensure that they have all their right to work documents, such as ID, social security card, and green card. And that can all help a student access, again, a summer paid job or paid internship. Now, as we look then at 12th grade milestones, we want to try and look at to ensure that they are supported throughout graduating high school. And this is particularly important as students work through the 12th grade. Children and youth in the foster care system oftentimes experience an average of 8 times changing schools while they are in care. And each time a student changes schools or possibly placements, they lose up to 6 months of their education, with each month impacting their educational outcomes, making it more difficult for a student to complete their high school graduation requirements. So foster youth who transfer after completing their second year of high school and who are unable to basically reasonably complete their new district's graduation requirements within the 4 years of high school, they do have access to AB 167 or 216. Students must still remain in high school for 4 years. It does not mean that they get to graduate early, but students who do this can graduate under the state's minimum graduation requirements. Now, students who choose this option will still receive the same high school diploma as their peers, but again, it does not fulfill the A through G requirements for UCs and CSUs. It's important that students are aware of this if they're considering a public four-year university or pathway. Now, students can look into additional information about their rights. And there are notes available or links available for the Alliance for Children's Rights in the Foster Youth Planning Guide for further exploration on AB 167 and 216. In addition to that particular graduation pathway, there are additional graduation pathways for students who are behind on units or who want to look at additional options to retake courses for graduation. One is to enroll in summer school, where students can make up credits or retake classes for a passing grade. Another could include continuation school, which allows students to work at their own pace to make up units and complete graduation requirements. Students also have a 5th year of high school option, and this can mean even if a student has already turned 19, they can remain in high school to complete their diploma. And the final option is looking at the high school equivalency test. Now, this is an option maybe for students who do not want to remain in the conventional high school, but who need to complete their high school equivalency. Students who are 18 years or older can enroll in a test preparation course and complete their high school equivalency to be able to move on to a community college or career education program. So it's important to know that, again, that some institutions will require students to complete at least 75% of their A through G courses with passing grades. So we want to make sure, again, students know which is the course that's going to be available for them. Next slide, we're looking at building again on the milestones of the 11th grade of what is available for students. Students in 12th grade, it is a critical grade where students need to decide which path they would like to embark on after high school graduation. And so again, while the UC-CSUs no longer require the SAT, we do encourage students to consider taking it if they're thinking about an out-of-state school, a private institution, or again, want to use it for placement purposes. If we're looking at narrowing down the list of majors, while students may hopefully have started exploring their list of majors during the summer prior to senior year or their 12th grade year, this is a time where they will want to narrow those down and find out again which institutions host the majors that they are interested in. This is a time to also, in the fall of their 12th grade year, apply to colleges and making sure they have all of the support that they need to complete those applications, working to schedule those times either with a caregiver, with the support of their academic and college counselor, but to find time to make sure those applications get in on time. And looking as well as applying for financial aid in the fall, usually that starts October 1st, along with exploring the campus-based support programs and other resources. These are all key steps to complete early in the fall of the 12th grade year. So there's a lot to do during that narrow time frame. So with that, let's go ahead and take a break while we process all this information and get ready for the next portion of our training. Now, this break can take 5 to 10 minutes. These can be adjusted depending on what time is available within the training. But for now, we'll see you soon.
Welcome back from your break. Hopefully you did get to take a little bit of a break. We'll now resume our training. So the next section starts off with a reflection opportunity if you choose to do this with your audience. And this is really creating an opportunity to check in with your caregivers about how they feel about supporting youth with the college matriculation process. And not everyone might know what the word matriculation means, but that's talking about college applications, financial aid applications, and things like that. And the point of this is to just see where they're at with this, because a lot of youth can feel scared and confused and intimidated with the process, but caregivers can too. And so this is really just to check in, see where they're at, and also normalize the process that it's okay if this feels overwhelming to them too. You know, they're not alone, and we'll make sure to give them a lot of information in the training about resources that they can tap into at the K-12 districts and the colleges to help support them as they're, working with their youth in this process. And again, this is something you can do in person or virtually. So of course, in person, you can have people raise their hands pretty simply, or even do parent share where you can have them turn to someone sitting next to them and just have a short conversation to check in and create a little more opportunity for dialogue. And that can also be a way to have people then report back about what they talked about with their partner. If you want it to be a little bit more anonymous, you can give people Post-it notes that are at their chairs or at their desk, and they can jot down their feelings about how they're feeling about the process, and they can put it up on the wall. And then you as the facilitator can look at what people put on the wall, notice any kind of themes that are coming up, or even cluster their responses. And of course, as I mentioned before, you can simply just have people raise their hands to talk about what's coming up for them. The other opportunity, if you're doing virtually via Zoom, is of course there's the poll feature, there's chats or just coming off of mute. There's also a word cloud tool, which is pretty fun on Mentimeter, where people can respond, and then depending on how popular that response is, let's say a lot of people say they feel intimidated. Then that word would get bigger and bigger, so they could see which types of responses are more popular than others. So a lot of different ways to do that opportunity. So once you've done your reflection opportunity, then we want to talk about how, right, it's normal to feel these feelings, and our youth can too, and to start to think about how their youth might actually respond if they're overwhelmed or stressed. You know, does that mean their youth is going to be avoidant or shut down? And because of this, we want to encourage our caregivers to remain patient and encouraging, and just to continue to support their youth through this entire process and beyond. And something to keep in mind is Senate Bill 12 is a law that passed that actually requires social workers and probation officers to identify a post-secondary support person to assist youth who are 16 or older with their college and financial aid applications, because it can be confusing to navigate. And that person can be you as the caregiver. And so we hope that the training today is really going to support you with the resources you need to feel confident to assist them and get them connected to the resources they need along the way. So with that, now we're ready to dive into the process of applying to college. We're not going to go through every step, but this will really give you a broad overview of things to keep in mind throughout this process. So here are some tips for applying to a CSU or UC. Now, just to keep in mind, as we talked about a little bit earlier, both systems have a selective admissions process, which means there's different admissions requirements, but they also have different minimum GPA requirements, different acceptance rates, different applications, and the cost of tuition at these two systems is different too. So students will need to make sure to do a little research, and they can go to the links on the slide to get more information about this process. The timelines of when to apply is on the slide, and a great time to start to do this is to start preparing the summer before senior year. Especially for the UC applications, they require essays, and you want to make sure that students get a head start in filling those out, and that there's actually someone who's available to review and proofread their essays before they submit them. Now, there's a fee to apply to these colleges, but most of our foster youth qualify for a fee waiver for up to 4 CSUs and 4 UCs. They'll get screened for the fee waiver automatically when they're filling out the application, so there's nothing more that they need to do. And most foster youth qualify based on their income and their household size. Now, as I talked about, you want to make sure your students are paying attention to the deadlines. November 30th is the application deadlines for both systems, and we'll talk a little bit more about the deadlines for the other systems as we go through the process. Another tip as they're filling out the applications is there's questions that asks the student about their experience in the foster care system, and we really encourage students to check off that box. You know, there might be a lot of stigma for some students in self-identifying and disclosing their status, but it's important to let students know the benefits, that they can get connected to different resources and benefits on their campus if they have experience in the foster care system. Another tip as well when they're filling out the applications is to indicate their interest in on-campus housing. Those are things like dorms that most of our UCs and CSUs have. And our foster youth are actually eligible to have priority consideration for housing on the CSUs and UC campuses, meaning they can kind of be first in line to get on-campus housing. Now, it's okay if they're not sure what their housing plans are going to be yet. Just have them indicate potential interest, because they can always decline it later if they end up having alternative plans with their housing, but at least it keeps that option open for now. And lastly, another tip is for students applying to the CSU system, we encourage them to apply for a program called EOP, the Educational Opportunity Program. And this is a program to apply. It's embedded within the general CSU application. It's at all of our CSUs and only a few of our UCs, but it provides admissions support, academic support, even financial support to students that have come from more educationally disadvantaged backgrounds. And usually most of our foster youth will qualify. But it's a little more time consuming to fill out the application. There's some autobiographical essays the student has to fill out, and they also have to provide 2 names and email addresses for people to write letters of recommendation. So we encourage people that are applying that make sure the students let those folks know who they have identified to write the letters of recommendation, that they're going to get an email from the CSUs to fill out that letter of recommendation. A lot of times those emails end up going to spam. Also, make sure that the student follows up with that person and make sure that they actually submit their letter of rec, because the student won't get any type of notification to know when it's done. And I would also just encourage someone to actually review their essays and proofread those as well before they're submitted. But the other benefit with EOP is, there's minimum admissions requirements to get into the CSUs, but the EOP program can actually admit a small amount of their students that don't meet the minimum requirements, what's called a special admit. So maybe they don't have the minimum GPA, they could still be admitted into the program. Now, after your students apply, there's still a lot of key steps once they find out if they've been accepted to any of the campuses. So let's say they've been admitted to multiple campuses. Now they need to decide where they want to go. And this is where we really recommend that they look at also their financial aid award, which we'll talk more about later in the next section, to see how much it's going to cost them to attend that college. And just because the college has higher tuition, they might still get offered more financial aid. So they want to look at their final out-of-pocket costs. Once they decide where they want to go to college, they submit what's called a statement of intent to register, saying that's where they plan to attend. So you want to make sure that they get that in. And then the next step is, if they do decide they want to do on-campus housing through something like dorms, we encourage them to fill out the paperwork and apply for this. Now, as I mentioned before, our foster youth qualify for priority on-campus housing, but they have to self-identify that they are a foster youth to take advantage of this benefit. Now, every college has a little bit of a different process, so we really advise that they get connected to a foster youth campus support program at their school. Then each one goes by a little bit of a different name, but those programs can help the student navigate this process and take advantage of on-campus housing. Students can also take advantage of priority registration when it's time to register and pick their classes. And what this can do, it can be a big help, but it can help students get first in line to pick out their classes before their peers. And to access this benefit, they have to have been in care on or after their 13th birthday and under the age of 26 if they're at the CSUs. The UCs all have priority registration for foster youth, but their eligibility criteria can vary campus to campus. But again, students have to self-identify to take advantage of this benefit for foster youth. And as I mentioned before, just get them connected to a foster youth support program at their campus as soon as possible to help them navigate all these steps in the process. They might have to put a housing deposit down or something of that nature, often even before their financial aid is awarded, and they can often work with the campus to make accommodations for the student. Now, here are some tips for applying to private colleges and universities. Now, with the private schools, every school is a little bit different. The deadlines vary, although they're often January 1st, but students will need to do their research to find out the application deadlines and processes for each private school they apply to. A lot of them use what's called the Common App, and the link is there on the screen as well, that they can fill out for many of the private colleges. But just like the deadlines and the applications, the admission requirements vary by college, right? Some might require essays, others don't. Some might have SAT requirements, others don't. So students will really just need to do their research. Now, as a tip, private schools are typically more expensive, but we don't want to discourage our youth from applying just because the cost of tuition is more expensive. There's no harm in applying if they're interested, and they should really wait until they get their financial aid award to find out what the total cost is to attend. A lot of these colleges might actually award a lot of institutional aid based off of their financial need or even their personal statements. And so once they get that information, then they can really determine if that college is one that they can afford. Now we have some general tips for applying to California community colleges, which again is another great option for students. Now, while there's a fee to apply to a CSU or UC and most of our private schools, it's actually free for students to apply to California community colleges. They all use the same application at cccapply.org. And deadlines of when to apply vary by college. Some start as early as fall semester as the student's senior year, but a lot of times it happens in the spring semester of their senior year. So students will really want to look into what those deadlines are when they're applying. Now remember, it's open access, so that means there's no eligibility requirements to attend, no minimum GPA. If they apply, they'll be admitted into the college. And it could be a great option even for students who are also considering four-year colleges to consider as a backup option too. Now, just like the CSU and UC apps, we encourage students to self-identify as a foster youth on the application, just to take advantage of any resources available on their campus. And similar to the EOP program at the CSUs, our community colleges also have something similar called EOP&S. It's not embedded within the general application though. So students who want to apply for this program actually have to fill out a separate application. These programs can fill up fast, so students should apply early. And we really encourage them to take advantage of this program as well as any other support programs on their campus that they're interested in. And generally, most of our foster youth will qualify for EOP&S. Now, while the community colleges are a lot cheaper when it comes to the cost of tuition, there still are enrollment fees for the courses that they're enrolling in. But the good news is most of our foster youth actually qualify for an enrollment fee waiver through something called the California College Promise Grant. And it's most foster youth qualify because it's based off of someone's income and household size. But there is an added benefit just for foster youth, and they can actually maintain this waiver regardless of their academic performance. So they can get essentially free classes throughout their time at community college. And lastly, once they apply, they'll eventually need to register for their classes. And foster youth can also qualify for priority registration at the community colleges. Just like the CSUs, they can get this benefit if they were in care on or after their 13th birthday and under the age of 26. However, there's a lot of steps they have to do before they can take advantage of priority registration. They have to complete an orientation, an assessment process to make sure they get placed in the right math and English class, and complete an education plan with an academic counselor. So we encourage students to start this process early, look up what the priority registration deadlines are at the college they're applying to make sure they get all of this completed on time to be able to take advantage of priority registration. Now here is a quiz. This is an interactive opportunity that you can do for your attendees, one of the options available to you. We actually have in the trainer's guide a sample of different questions that you might want to utilize to facilitate this quiz. This is just another way to reinforce learning. Of course, there's many ways you can do this, both in person or online. And one tool that we do have that you can explore to see if it's a good fit is something called Mentimeter. And I'm going to just show you real quickly what that might look like. So this is the back end of what Mentimeter looks like. If you wanted to do a quiz, what you can do is create these different questions. This is one we did for financial aid. They can be true and false, multiple choice. And then people are given a link that they can access on their phone or on their computer or even a code. And they log in, you can see they create a little username, and then it's a competition. So they get points based off of answering the question correctly and answering it quickly. And as they respond, you can see, who moves up in the leaderboard, who's doing better. You go through the questions, you get a leaderboard after each question. And it's just a fun way to make it a competition. And if you have the resources, it's always fun to give someone a gift card or something like this. But this, again, is another fun tool you can use to reinforce all that technical knowledge that we just went over in the applying to college section. So with that, we will actually transition to our next session.
So this next section, we'll be looking at paying for college. And we know that college can be expensive, but we also want folks to know that there are a lot of financial resources available for foster youth to make college affordable and attainable. So in this section, we'll be looking not only at why financial aid is important, but also how to apply for it and how to maintain it. We'll also be looking at understanding the process, since we know that this can often be confusing and maybe feel overwhelming for students. So we want caregivers and adult supporters to really be aware of the different steps to help, again, provide that guidance and one-on-one support to students. So first, let's explore and see what really is the impact of financial aid and how it makes a difference. So again, we know financial aid makes a significant difference in student success in college, which is why this is such a critical part of this process and getting ready to support students in successfully filling out the application. Research has found that high school seniors who complete the FAFSA are 63% more likely to enroll in higher education. And of the students who received $7,500, a minimum of $7,500, we know that 49% transferred or graduated. Now, this is compared to when we see students receiving $1,000 to $2,000 of financial aid, 17% transferred or graduated. So we know financial aid can make an important difference in the outcomes for students. If we're looking at what types of financial aid, what do we mean when we're talking about financial aid? So there are three main buckets. When we're looking at gift aid, this is free money that does not need to be repaid so long as the student is also doing their part in attending classes and in passing their classes and making adequate progress towards their graduation goals. Gift aid can include a couple of different aspects. So it can include grants or scholarships, and these types of gift aid, again, may be given out on a one-time basis, or they may be renewable, which means that students can receive them year after year. A fee waiver acts like gift aid, but it's applied to college tuition fees. So essentially making tuition and the cost of college, at least for tuition fees, free. One common type of fee waiver that we've referenced is a California College Promise Grant. Jessica just spoke about that in the earlier section. And this provides access to free community college courses for current and former foster youth. The other area is work study. And so work study provides paid part-time jobs for undergraduate and graduate students to help them cover their cost of their education. Many times these jobs are in areas where the student may be interested from a career perspective, and they also can help a student develop work experience as well as time management skills. And they often really align with the student's school schedule. Now, the last area is student loans. And loans unlike the other two categories, do need to be repaid and are oftentimes repaid with interest. So students should keep in mind that loans can be a positive investment in their education, but it should be the last resort. Ideally, we want to make sure that all other forms of financial aid are available first, and that students, if they do decide to take out a loan or accept a loan, that they look into the different types of loans that are available and the different types of payment plans for them to do their proper research. Now, where does all this financial aid come from? This is oftentimes federal financial aid that comes through, as well as colleges. So federal financial aid offering the grants, the work study, the student loans. Some of it is also offered directly through the state of California. And then colleges and universities may also offer grants and scholarships. And lastly, there's also community organizations and private companies that can offer scholarships that range on a number of factors like special talents, academic performance, leadership, work experience, and a number of different areas. But now let's take a look at how this all stacks up together in the next slide. When we look at the types of financial aid, again, that can be available for students who are attending a CSU, a UC, or a California community college. The good news is there is a lot of financial aid. So while we don't go into detail necessarily with every single type of aid that you'll see on this table, we do want students to ultimately know that, again, this aid can be available. And as you can see, this is a particular table that reflects the type of aids and the quantities of aid that are available for the 22-23 academic year for a full-time student who are basically a student who's enrolled full-time. Now, as you can see, the totals add up between $20,000 to $30,000 in grants or tuition waivers. So in some instances, students who are foster youth or have dependents may qualify for $6,000 in Cal Grant, which is a state aid, through the Cal Grant Foster Youth Access Award. And that total amount of aid identified in the chart does not include SILP stipends that are available to students who are eligible for AB-12 or extended foster care. So SILP stipends can provide an additional $12,000 for living expenses. And so when you consider that, along with the different types of grant aid available, it can add up quickly. Now, please be aware again that these figures are for the 22-23 academic year, and they are subject to change annually. So when we look at then how do students get access to this type of aid, we'll look at the next slide to identify the 3 steps for maximizing aid. Now, the first step is to have you fill out the FAFSA or the CADA, the California DREAM Act application. And this process can take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour with a young person. The next, we encourage them to immediately apply for the Chafee Grant, and we will talk about what this is and how they can do so. And this process can take about 10 minutes. Lastly, they should definitely, students to take advantage of this time to set up their Web Grants account, which is a simple 10-minute process. And in that Web Grants account, students can navigate certain and manage their financial aid. So when working with a young person, it's a good idea to set aside at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half, just to be safe, but to help them fill out their forms and have the time needed to do so. Now, how to apply for financial aid we have a number of different resources to help with this process that provide essential information. And these pieces can include things like the Financial Aid Guide for California Foster Youth, which comes with a complimentary visual guide, which includes a step-by-step instruction and screenshots of every question on the FAFSA and the CADA. So really the most important thing is, again, making sure students are connected to an adult supporter who is going to assist them and navigate through that process. But again, don't have to do it alone. These resources are available to assist. The Financial Aid Guide provides an overview of the common types of financial aid, how to apply for them, and how to maintain the financial aid. There's also the checklist that is available after filling the FAFSA or CADA, as well as a pre-recorded webinar to provide in-depth training on how to assist foster youth. And things can definitely change regularly, so please be sure to check back on the links provided. So making sure that changes to the FAFSA that are upcoming in 2023 and 2024 are reflected. Now, we also have a new scholarship resource guide, which features scholarships available both locally and nationally, specific to foster youth. So we do encourage foster youth to check out that resource as well. Now, how do we then begin applying for financial aid? Well, there's two primary applications. If a student is a US citizen, a permanent resident, or an eligible non-citizen, they can complete the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, on the website, fafsa.gov. Now, this is one application that is used for both federal and state financial aid. Now, if the student is, if the applicant is an undocumented immigrant, they can complete the CADA, which stands for the California DREAM Act application. And so what does it mean to be California DREAM Act eligible? Well, eligible undocumented students don't have to pay for non-resident tuition, which is more expensive. And they can also qualify for certain types of California state and university aid. So unfortunately, they will not be eligible to complete the FAFSA, but students, again, can determine their eligibility by going to the link on the slide, and students who are granted temporary Social Security number or work permit through Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program should apply for state financial aid through the CADA. A student does not, however, have to be part of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, to apply for CADA. So those are two different programs. The California Student Aid Commission, we want to make sure folks know, keeps the CADA information and applicant information confidential, which means that that information is not shared or disclosed with any federal agencies, including immigration enforcement. So if a student, for example, may also qualify, if we look at the next slide, for special immigrant juvenile status, this may be a category or an area where some students may qualify who are undocumented. They may receive the special immigrant juvenile status if they have been involved in an adoption or guardianship proceeding, and they have been abandoned, abused, or neglected, and they may be eligible to obtain this status by applying to become, and this can help them become a lawful permanent resident, or also obtaining, it basically means obtaining their green card. So students with a pending application for SIJS are not eligible for the federal financial aid, but they should submit a CADA until they have received their permanent resident status or their green card. If an undocumented student does not have an application for SIJS pending, the Child Welfare Agency should be contacted for eligibility screening. And this is to determine if this is the right option for the youth, since it's recommended that the referral happens before the youth turns 18 years old. So when we're looking at definition of need, let's figure out what that includes. For the FAFSA and the CADA, both ask a series of questions to determine a student's ability to contribute financial aid to their education. So this may formerly have been known as expected family contribution, and now the Student Aid Index states how much the student is able to contribute to the cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is a total amount it costs to attend college. This includes tuition, housing, transportation, books and supplies, and other costs. So when calculating need, the Student Aid Index, or EFC, expected family contribution, is subtracted from the total cost of attendance to arrive at the eligibility for need-based aid. Now, as you may recall, a student's EFC is oftentimes 0, meaning that they may be eligible for the greatest amount of aid if they're a current former foster youth and can qualify as a financial independent. So let's look at then when to apply for FAFSA or CADA. When a student applies for financial aid is very important, as many students oftentimes miss out if they don't meet the certain priority deadline. So the priority application period is October 1st through March 2nd, before the start of the school year that the student will want to begin college. So for example, if we're in 21-22, then the student would be filling out the application between October 1st of 2021 through March 2nd of 2022 if they are planning on attending school the following school year, in the school year 22-23. Students can apply for March 2nd and should be encouraged to apply even if they missed that deadline. So again, we don't want students to think it's over, I can't apply. We want to make sure that they complete the application, but as much as possible, reach before that March 2nd deadline. And students can apply for financial aid before they apply for college. So it's okay if they don't know which college they're planning to attend, they can still submit their applications before that time. And some colleges, such as four-year universities, may have earlier priority deadlines. So it is important for students to be aware of which deadlines are requested by colleges they're applying to, and have students apply again as soon as possible. For knowing then what to bring for filling out that application is another important step. And this includes a couple of key areas for filling out both the FAFSA and the CADA. So whether the student is filling out either application, please make sure to take the time in advance to pull these documents or these pieces of information together. First, the student will need their social security number or alien registration number if they're filling out the FAFSA. Additionally, make sure that students know that their name that they fill out the FAFSA with the name that appears on their social security card. Oftentimes there may be differences in spelling or additional hyphens or other last names that may be added or dropped over time. So please make sure that the information aligns with what is listed on their social security card. For students filling out the CADA, it's recommended that they enter their statewide student identifying number for the same reason. It's not required, but it is recommended, and students can get their information from their student counselor. Students will need to have an email address, and it's recommended that students use a general email address versus maybe one issued by their school, as ones that are sometimes associated with their school district may expire after a certain period of time. And so we want to make sure that students have consistent access to this email address, since they'll be using it for a long period of time. On the application, students can list up to 10 colleges, and so they can update this as needed. But we want to make sure students really have a full and robust list of colleges that they want to include, especially if they're not sure yet which colleges they plan to attend. Lastly, students will need to know their tax information from the prior year. So this means, for example, if a student is planning on attending college in 2023, 2024, and they will want to have information for the 2021 income year. Now, most high school seniors may have not earned enough to file taxes, but they will need to report their income for any part-time jobs that they held. So students will want to have their W-2s or 1099 forms available so that they can fill out the information correctly. Now, looking then at other considerations on the next slide for independent status, this I started mentioning a little bit earlier. We won't discuss every question on the FAFSA, but this one is definitely worth reviewing. Now, if a student can answer yes to either of these questions, they will qualify for independent status on the FAFSA. And this means that they do not need to report any information about their parents on the application, including their financial information. So if a student qualifies for independent status, they only need to provide information about themselves. And these two questions, as you see on the screen, at any time since you turned age 13, were both your parents deceased, or were you in foster care or a dependent or ward of the court? The other question, does someone other than your parents or step-parent have legal guardianship of you as determined by court in your state or legal residence? So again, in this instance, foster parents, resource parents, relative caregiver, legal guardians, and service providers do not qualify as parents on the FAFSA or CADA. So it is important that the youth does not provide caregiver financial information on the FAFSA or CADA. right? They may qualify for less money if they do so. And so even if the youth was in foster care or was a dependent of the court for just one day after turning age 13, they can qualify as independent for purposes of the FAFSA. Now, if a student was a dependent of the ward of court but remained in legal custody of their parent, they are not considered. So again, this is if they remain in custody of their legal parent, they are not considered a ward of the court for the purposes of FAFSA and therefore may not qualify for independent status. And other groups who can also qualify for independent status, though, this includes individuals who are married, have children, or who are in the military. So some foster youth may qualify for independent status within one of these other categories as well. Since many students can get confused with this question, it's important that students are educated about this question and again, have proper guidance as to how to complete that information. Next, we'll look at additional special considerations for foster youth. So foster youth do not have to report following information in their financial section. Students who receive benefits from AB 12 or extended foster care, commonly known as SIL payments, do not have to report information, this financial information on their FAFSA. Along also is a supplemental security income. Now, additionally, foster youth should not identify on the FAFSA by marking, or sorry, foster youth should self-identify on the FAFSA by marking yes to the question, are you a current or former foster youth, or were you at any time in foster care? And so while this question is not on the CADA, it is on the FAFSA. And so we want to make sure that students, again, do identify, or sorry, the questions are both on the CADA and on the FAFSA, and students should identify on both applications of their status so that they can get connected to additional support services by the college they plan to attend. This is oftentimes used as a data point for college campuses to reach out to students and connect to services. So it's very important, again, that students can make sure to identify. So with this, looking next then at applying for the Chafee grant. The Chafee grant can be, again, a short application, typically takes about 10 minutes to complete, that offers students $5,000 for up to 5 years, whether or not they attend college consecutively. This is for eligible foster youth who were in care after the age of 16 and who are younger than 26 years of age. This funding can be used for expenses like tuition, for books, for housing, transportation, and other costs of attendance. It can be used in state. It can be used out of state for a career technical program or a 2-year institution or a 4-year institution. So it really can apply to any pathway a student chooses. To qualify, again, students must be a dependent or ward of the court at least one day between the ages of 16 years old to 18 years old and placed in out-of-home foster care. The grant is also dependent on financial need and the number of classes taken. So students must be enrolled in at least part-time units, typically 6 units, to be eligible for this grant. There is a separate online application for students to complete. Again, we noted it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. And so while the FAFSA and CADA is an application that is filled out annually, the Chafee application is only filled out the first year where a student begins college. After that, they will not have to complete the application annually. It will be automatically renewed. However, students will need to make sure that they update information. Now, that takes us over to our web grants. So with web grants, students are asked to create a web grant account. Now, if you remember, this is the third critical step to accessing financial aid. This is web grants is a system to manage your California state financial aid, such as the Chafee grant and the Cal grant. And here students can learn how much they received, and they will be notified if there's any further actions that need to be taken to successfully receive their funds. So for example, one student determines which school they plan to attend, they will need to log in and to select their planned school of attendance. So if I originally thought I was going to go to Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach, but I decided instead to go to University of Southern California, I will need to make sure to go in and make those updated changes on the Web Grants portal. One very important feature is the ability to determine if their high school submitted their grade point average, which is required to receive California State financial aid, known as the Cal Grant. So for those planning on attending, for those students planning on attending a four-year university, it is very important that students make sure that their high school GPA has been submitted by the March 2nd deadline. Students can check this site regularly and can check for this information. If that information is not provided, since sometimes high schools do not do this, or there may be an error in matching students' information, it's important that students take steps to make sure that their GPA is submitted. Ultimately, it is their responsibility, and we want to make sure to, again, empower them with the information to know how to do so. This could be the difference between several $1,000s in aid. So it is incredibly important. Now, after we've completed these 3 core steps, we do have more instructions available about GPA verification process, as well as other steps related to verifying student aid reports on the after the FAFSA checklist. Now, this tool can help guide youth through all the critical follow-up steps that are part of this process, since filling out the FAFSA and the CADA is just really the first step in the financial aid process. Now, if you look at the link provided on the screen, the resources for financial aid, again, there are multiple additional resources along with this checklist available to help answer many of the questions that are oftentimes related, again, to completing the FAFSA and the CADA applications. Moving on to the next part of maintaining financial aid. So once a student receives financial aid, there is much to be celebrated. They've worked very hard and they are now more likely to successfully transfer and graduate. With the exception of student loans, financial aid typically does not need to be repaid if a student keeps up their end of the bargain. However, there is, again, an agreement that students have entered to make sure that they continue to access and hold on to that free money or gift aid. And so this is often known as Student Satisfactory Academic Progress, or SAP. And satisfactory academic progress is set by the college. And these standards ensure that students, again, are successfully completing their coursework and making progress towards their graduation goal. Each school has a SAP policy that determines who is eligible to continue receiving aid. And if a student fails to meet SAP for 2 consecutive terms, they may lose financial aid or be suspended from financial aid and ultimately can lose it altogether. So in some cases, students may be asked to repay their aid for failing to complete courses, or again, fill out an appeal process. So again, it's an important part to be familiar with. And if you look on your screen, you'll see there's typically 3 areas. Again, passing enough classes along the way with grades of C or better, completing with a satisfactory GPA, which is considered in most cases a 2.0, or again, completing courses within a reasonable time. One way to help students, if we look at the next slide, to make sure that they maintain financial aid is to really make sure students understand the importance of the unit load and how that impacts their time. So students should understand how much time is required to complete a full-time course schedule. And this is often an important conversation to have with an academic counselor who will ask students questions about their other responsibilities. And part of the conversation is geared towards understanding the amount of academic hours that will be required for full-time status. So in this table, you can see that 1 unit of course time translates into 1 hour of instructional time and 2 to 3 hours of time outside of class to study or prepare for the course. When you translate that into a 12-unit course load, that includes 12 hours of instructional time or class time, along with 24 to 36 hours of study time or outside of class learning time. And that can include preparing for tests, reviewing notes, doing class readings, meeting with work groups. So for a total of 36 to 48 hours, this is considered essentially a full-time work schedule. So this is where we get that, that notation of, again, what does it mean to be a full-time student? As noted, students can receive $19,000 to $33,000 to go to school full-time. So they are essentially being paid to study and should treat school as their job. Students who need to work can seek out the federal work-study programs, which tend to accommodate school schedules and allow for students to prioritize school over their work. So the reason why we bring up SAP and we spend some time covering this is because as many as 1/3 of foster youth failed to make SAP within their first year of college. And for Black students, that experience rose to 42%. And this was a study that was conducted among students in community colleges. So students that fail to meet SAP are really significantly more likely to disenroll or drop out of college. And factors such as these contribute to one of the reasons why 48% of foster youth enroll in college, but only 10% graduate. So as a caregiver, it is critically important that students are educated about these policies and again, understand how to access support early on to be able to maintain their grades and continue forward with their classes. Students who may experience personal hardship or again, academic challenges are encouraged to reach out to their support programs, which will be coming momentarily. And these can be resources such as tutoring, EOP or EOP&S programs, foster youth support programs, and others. So in addition, advise students to meet with counselors if they're thinking about dropping courses so that they really understand how that decision will impact them and their SAP eligibility. So now let's look at one way to kind of review some of this information. So we've just covered a lot of information. As Jessica mentioned earlier, there are ways to structure a review as part of a quiz, either with Kahoots, Mentimeter, and some of the other tools that she mentioned earlier. This is an opportunity again to help your caregivers and participants engage with this information and have a time to review and answer any questions. So again, be creative. The trainer's guide does provide the questions that you can utilize for the quiz, and again, can provide alternatives for how to administer this quiz or again, engage your audience in review of this content. So with that, we'll be passing it back to Jessica for setting up foster youth for college success.
All right, thank you, Linda. So now we're going to talk about all these resources that we've been mentioning that are available for foster youth at the college campuses that can really support them once they start their college journey. And the reason we talk about this is we want to make sure that youth get connected to these resources early on, ideally before they even graduate from high school. And this is to prevent a phenomenon that's called summer melt. And summer melt is when high school students are actually accepted into a college, but never actually enroll in the fall semester after high school. And there's a lot of studies that show that anywhere from 10 to 40% of college intending students fail to enroll. And this happens a lot of times primarily to low-income first-generation students. And a lot of the time that's because they don't have resources, supports, guidance, or even just encouragement to help them during that summer period to make sure they get to campus on that first day. And so we want to make sure that our youth are connected to all these supports, as I mentioned, before they graduate from high school to really prevent summer melt and make sure that they're set up for success to persist and to graduate ultimately to their degree or certificate goal. We don't want to wait until there's a crisis. We really want to be proactive and not reactive to get them to these resources. And the best way to do this is through a warm handoff. You know, for a lot of youth, they've experienced a lot of trauma and they might be intimidated or scared or, you know, kind of distrustful of forming a new relationship. So we really encourage caregivers to go beyond just giving a student, hey, here's a name, here's a number. The best situation would be to really help connect the youth to that program. Go together with them for an initial meeting, take them to the college campus, or you can do this over Zoom now too. Set up a Zoom session to help the youth meet the new person and make it a successful transition to really build a new positive relationship with that program person. So we've talked about this a little bit, but want to give you a little bit of an overview of the different resources available just for foster youth. So at minimum, all of our community colleges have a foster youth liaison that you can reach out to. A lot of times they're actually housed even within the financial aid office, and they can be a great resource to help foster youth navigate any issues that might come up along the way with their financial aid. But in addition to that, there's a program called Next Up. Used to be called CAFE, so you might still hear of that name. But currently, it's at about 46 of our community colleges. And it's a great program. It's housed within EOP&S. It provides even more services and resources than the EOP&S program just for foster youth who were in care on or after their 13th birthday and enroll at least one day before the age of 26. To also access this program, there's actually not a unit requirement anymore. This is new. They used to have to be in 9 units or more, but now they can access this, with any amount of units that they're enrolled in, as long as they create an educational plan to move the student eventually into at least 9 units. Now, I said, right, they're currently at about 46 community colleges, but the good news is in 2023, there was new funding allocated in the state, and it's actually going to be expanding this program statewide. So definitely check with your college to get information about the Next Step program at their campus. Now, in addition to Next Step, there's even a lot of foster youth programs at the community colleges that serve foster youth who may not qualify for Next Step. They go by different names. Sometimes they're called Guardian Scholars or Link or Stars. And their eligibility criteria varies campus to campus because while Next Step is a state-funded program that's pretty structured in its eligibility requirements, these other programs can vary at each campus. But it's great to ask about these programs too in case your student doesn't qualify for Next Step or there isn't yet a Next Step program at their campus. And in addition, there's programs like these at the CSUs, the UCs, and even a lot of our private schools. So definitely have your student look into these. Again, the names can vary at our four-year colleges as well as the eligibility requirements, but they can provide a lot of robust services for students. Now, if you're trying to figure out, well, how do I know who to reach out to? Where do I start? Definitely check out our website, California College Pathways. It's got everything you need to know about foster youth and higher education. And there's a tool on there, if you click on the orange button, that can help connect youth to the programs at the colleges that they're planning on attending in California. And as I mentioned, there's all kinds of other information on there too that might be helpful. Now, in addition to those foster youth specific programs, there's a lot of other resources found at college campuses that aren't specific to foster youth, but can still support students and kind of their overall holistic needs. Now, we already talked about the EOP and EOP&S program, but there's even more programs. So for example, at our community colleges, there's programs like CalWorks and CARES that can support students who are parenting. And they can be found at every community college and can help with things like finding a job or childcare. There's also mental health services at our colleges across all the systems. And it's not unique to foster youth, but college can be stressful for any of our students. So getting them connected to mental health resources, either on campus or in the community, is another great strategy to set your student up for success. And then there's student disability services, sometimes called accessibility centers, depending on which college you're looking at, but they can help students with physical, mental, or even learning disabilities. And if the student discloses that they have that disability, they can get support and special accommodations. But we encourage the student to disclose their status early on and get connected to these programs to start the process to get support, because sometimes it can take a little time to get these services set up. Now, if you're working with a student who had an individualized education plan, an IEP, in high school, they can actually bring that documentation to show proof of their diagnosis to get supports and accommodations. And if they don't have an IEP, but you think they might benefit from support, they can still get assessed at the college. But they can get support like receiving full-time enrollment status when they're taking a reduced unit load, assistance with note-taking, special test-taking conditions, like maybe they need a quiet environment or a longer time, interpreters, and all kinds of things like that. So highly encourage students to get connected. A lot of times they might be hesitant because there can be a lot of negative stigma with that. So that might be something you want to support them on as well. There's also basic needs centers for students experiencing food insecurity or housing insecurity. A lot of colleges have tutoring resources or study skills workshops. And there's also a lot of cultural programming or student clubs for all kinds of students. One example is Emoja. That's a community college program for students that are African American. There's all kinds of groups and clubs for other students as well. There's Rising Scholars, for example, for students who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. There's the Dream Center for undocumented students. And lastly, there's even a program called College Promise at the community colleges, not to be confused with the California College Promise Grant. That's something different. Each of the College Promise programs are a little bit different, but they can provide essentially free tuition for full-time students. A lot of them have other benefits and supports in place too. So definitely, encourage your students to check out and ask about a College Promise program if it's a good fit for them and their needs and their goals. All right, well, now we're going to transition into our next section on help is available for caregivers. Now, as we've talked about, we know that planning and preparing for college can be complicated even for the most organized family. But we want to make sure that caregivers know that there's resources to help them navigate this process at both the school districts and the child welfare system. So if they're feeling like they have questions, they need extra assistance, there's a lot of different folks that they can reach out to along the way. So let's start with our K-12 districts. Now, our post-secondary educational planning guide has a lot more information about a lot of these different resources that caregivers and families can access. But here's a few that we did want to highlight. One of them is, of course, the academic counselor. We mentioned that earlier on, but this is a great person to get connected to and get to know to make sure that students they're taking the right courses, that they're not just enrolled in classes for high school, but if they're, for example, interested in pursuing a four-year degree like we talked about, that they're also in A through G courses. So they can be a good resource to make sure the student's on track to graduate. They can help students get fee waivers for placement exams like the SAT or the ACT, or get youth connected to other resources available at their campus or in their community. A lot of times the K-12 districts will also have tutoring resources that foster youth can tap into. In addition to that, every district in California has a foster youth district liaison. Sometimes you might hear people refer it as a AB 490 liaison. That was the law that passed that established and created this foster youth district liaison. But they can be a great resource too. And if you're having difficulty navigating the high school system, I recommend getting connected with the foster youth district liaison. They can help the student collect transcripts. They can help the student navigate getting partial credits if they've moved around from a lot of different high schools so that they're on track for high school graduation. They can also help identify tutoring resources at the district or in the community. And as Linda talked about before with determinations around AB 167-216, they can also help to provide some information about that process as well. And lastly, students can also connect with their foster youth services coordinating program. These are housed within each county office of education. Now on this slide, we just have general information, but as a trainer, definitely recommend that you add the contact information for your local FYSCP, so they know who to reach out to and how it's structured in your county. But we do have, if you're not sure who that person is, we do have in the trainer's notes a link to a statewide roster that you can access as well. But they can provide a lot of different great services. So they provide a lot of technical assistance and training to the districts. They also do a lot of training for different stakeholders. But a lot of times you'll see they're involved in tutoring resources, educational case management. Sometimes they might help students navigate, getting their transcripts or partial credits and things of that nature. And they're a great resource for assisting students with completing their financial aid applications and can help coordinate efforts in your county and should be knowledgeable about who to get connected to and good resources locally as well. So caregivers, if they're having a hard time, have them get connected to one of those 3 entities along the way. Now, another resource that we want to make sure caregivers are aware about is the Independent Living Program, often just referred to as ILP. Some counties even call it Independent Living Skills Program or Services Program, ILSP. But this is a voluntary program offered through the Child Welfare and Probation Department. So for example, if you're serving a foster youth served by probation, and it provides services and funding to help youth gain the skills that they need to live independently. Now, eligibility for this program is for youth who were in foster care or kin gap. So this is good to know too. This can also apply to kin gap youth who are in care anytime between the ages of 16 to 18. There's also some expanded eligibility for a kin gap youth. It could be a little complicated to navigate. So I'd say if you've got a kin gap youth, you're not sure if they're eligible, contact your ILP program and they can help to determine eligibility. Every county's ILP program has transition coordinators. In some larger counties, there's many transition coordinators, and they can provide these services to the youth up until the age of 21. And they help out with services around helping them into their post-secondary educational goals, the workforce, maybe helping with getting interview clothes. They can help navigate housing and things like that. Now, again, on this slide, we don't have any contact information, but we recommend that you add the contact information of your local independent living program. And we also have in the slide notes a roster that we maintain here at JBay that folks can access to look up some of the local resources if you're not already in contact with your local ILP program. But again, they're just another great resource. It's time limited, only up until the age of 21. So we do recommend that students take advantage of this program to see what they might be eligible for as they transition into higher education. Now, lastly, I wanted to mention the Child and Family Team Meeting, or CFTM. You might be familiar with the Child and Family Team. Caregivers are part of the Child and Family Team, but there is a meeting that can be convened to make a plan to support foster youth in reaching their college and career goals and getting them connected to the right supports and resources to meet those goals along the way. But I want to note that CFTs, they don't have to be focused on just a crisis. You don't have to have these meetings when there's just a problem. You can use this meeting proactively to talk about the youth educational goals, and it's encouraged to have education-focused child and family team meetings to check in about where they're at, what are their goals, how are they doing, and what supports do they need along the way to reach those goals. And the post-secondary educational planning guide and everything we've talked about in this training are great things to bring into that meeting to look at, okay, what are the key educational planning milestones for my youth in 11th and 12th grade? What needs to happen and who's going to help them along the way to complete all those key steps? So just want to make sure caregivers don't feel like they're alone in this process, and they can leverage the team in these meetings to make a plan together about how they're going to assist youth along the way. Now, lastly, we have another opportunity if you're interested in doing a quiz, just as we've talked about before. We have instructions in the trainer's guide with sample questions and answers. If you want to do a quiz to kind of reinforce learning once again on this section that we just did on all the resources that are available to assist youth and caregivers into higher education. And lastly, just wanted to remind caregivers once again that there's a lot of resources that they can access from this course. So we have the link on the slide where the caregivers can access these materials. And I'm actually going to show you in a moment where to find those materials just so you're comfortable with the website. But once again, this is what will be available once we update our post-secondary educational planning guide and integrate those existing handouts into that guide. They'll have that guide, they'll have a financial aid guide, which includes our scholarship resources. We'll have our benefits chart and our career guides and school stability enrollment handouts from our partners at the Alliance for Children's Rights. So we mention this at the end because we give a lot of information in the training and we don't want caregivers to feel like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to remember all of this? These materials they can go back to and look up the information, and they don't have to commit everything to memory because there's a lot of steps along the way. So as you close out your training, one of the opportunities that you can do as another way to practice all the information that they just learned is a vignette. So this is an opportunity to put people into small groups. You can do this in person, or you can do it virtually on Zoom through breakout rooms, where we actually have a vignette that everyone can be provided, and you can have everyone read the scenarios, look at the discussion questions, respond together in their small groups, and then come back together as a larger group to report out. Now, to do this, it does take a bit of time, and of course, depending on the size of your audience, so you'll just want to plan for that as you're going through. So let me just show you real quick where those materials are. So this is the link to your materials as the facilitator that we talked about earlier. We've got the trainer's guide, the PowerPoint, the webinar, and down below, here's the caregiver supporting materials. When you click on this, this brings you to all the information that you would give the caregivers. So again, you can give caregivers this link so that they can download and access any of the materials for free. And at the very bottom, there's the student vignette available in English and in Spanish. So if you click on the student vignette, there you'll find it. It's one page. So if you're doing this activity in person, you definitely want to print out the vignette in advance. Otherwise, you can give folks the link. You could even read the vignette together as a large group and then have people break into smaller groups. But this vignette's a little different than in Ed Course 1. It's a two-part vignette. So you'd have folks read the scenario and then reflect to the discussion questions. It's designed to be like, okay, here you've got a student, they've just started 12th grade, here's what's going on with her, what would you do, how would you support her? All right, the student makes some choices, and so now you're trying to think about, okay, now she's in spring semester of senior year, what do you want to do to support her? And there's discussion questions embedded. And it's all reflective of the content we've already reviewed in the training. Now, when you go to the trainer's guide, have this up here on the screen, I just want to make sure you're aware that there is information about what to look out for in the vignette. So for each discussion question in the trainer's guide, you'll see we've got a lot of context here for, okay, these are the things to look out for. So for example, one of the questions is, Kimberly, which pathway is a good fit for you? And this is where you can have them think about, well, she's behind in her credits, so maybe she wants to explore AB 167-216 graduation exceptions, but then she won't be able to go to a 4-year. So what's best for her? She'd have to apply to a community college. Let's make sure she's connected to her ed rights holder to see what's best for her. Or, you know, what's her GPA? Which pathway makes the most sense for her based off of her GPA? Or does she want to do some credit recovery or things of that nature? How could we still get her admitted into a CSU if she doesn't have the right GPA? And that's where we talk about, you know, the EOP program might have special admissions, so maybe she could still get in, worth exploring as an option if she doesn't have the minimum GPA requirements. So all this is here for you as a trainer, and if you do decide to do the vignette, definitely, read this information before, make sure you feel comfortable and confident with the questions, and then you can guide the group in case some of the key themes don't come up. Then you can just let them know, something else you might want to consider is this, this, and this. So that's all on there. So just to bring us back to our slides, after the vignette is a closing reflection, and I do recommend that everybody does this, but it asks the caregivers to think about at least one thing that they will do differently with their youth within the next 30 days. They learn all this content, now how are they going to apply it with the youth in their care? And encourage them to say it out loud, to write it in the chat, put it on a Post-it, write it down. There's different ways you can get creative about this. But research shows someone is more likely to do it when they've said it out loud, other people have heard it, supports them in being accountable for their plan of action. And after that, you have completed the training. And as I mentioned, there's at least 10 minutes, to 10 minutes embedded into the timing of the course to do questions and answers. And it's really up to you as a facilitator if you want to save the Q&A until the end, maybe do 5 minutes in the beginning, 5 in the end, or respond to people throughout the training, throughout the chat, if you're doing it virtually. But that concludes our training. So thank you so much for participating. Again, all the information you need, you should be able to find on the link that we've provided. And we appreciate you taking the time to support our caregivers so that our young people can, as we talked about, right, turn their dreams into degrees. So thank you so much.